everybody, and welcome to the first video in the series for my Ghostly Greetings mini album tutorial. Now, I typically do not do a tutorial this way, so I'm going to explain to you what is going to happen with this tutorial so that you have an understanding before you follow along. Normally, when I do a Graphic 45 album, I do a written tutorial, but I have decided since it is past Halloween, I'm just going to do a video tutorial for this one and see how it goes. And I don't have the album finished already. I'm going to be releasing the videos of the tutorial before the album is even done. So if you want to wait to see the album first before you decide if you're going to follow along and make it, that's perfectly fine, but it might take a couple of weeks before that happens because I also have a huge renovation going on right now in my house. This is going to take a little bit longer than it normally would. So I'm also going to give some insight into how I've chosen to design this album. Someone a while back, one of my followers or subscribers, had asked how I go about designing an album. And I will tell you that this one is really challenging for me. I am not typically a Halloween person. I don't really enjoy Halloween projects. I think the paper is a lot prettier in person than when I first saw the paper was going to be released. And I did mention that in the video when I first got it. So I think the papers are really pretty, especially the ones with the pumpkins and the flowers. But Halloween itself, I kind of struggle with. So I've really had a hard time with deciding how I was going to design with this paper collection. And then other things got in the way and I just wasn't able to do this before Halloween. I did start to design something with this project, or I had an idea. And I started to cut the paper for it. So you'll see that this is not a full 12 by 12 because I've already cut it down. But I decided not to do what I was originally going to do. And I sat the paper aside and just didn't do anything with it. With me, whenever I start to design an album, I look at the different papers to get an idea first of what I might put on the cover and then what size pages I might want my album to be. I don't always do the same size album, and I don't typically like square size albums, so you won't often see like an 8x8 or a 9x9 or a 6x6 album from me. I just prefer the rectangular shapes than I do the square shapes. So when I'm typically starting out with a paper collection, I will fan all the papers out and start to go through. I like to look at the cut apart pieces because that gives me inspiration for the album cover. I also look at pieces like the ephemera pieces and a chipboard. Here I have the entire collection, so I'm going to use everything, including the rub-on transfers. So I start to look at all this stuff to get ideas about what I want to do. This is another one of the sheets. I did cut this down because I was starting to do a different thing, but I would have been looking at all of these pieces to decide what I was going to do for my album. I've decided, after a lot of sitting and just staring at this paper, literally today especially, I've sat probably for an hour just staring at the paper, trying to get some ideas, and something finally came to me. So I have this paper already cut down to the size that it needs to be, and I'll explain that later whenever we go to do our tutorial, but I'm going to explain how my idea kind of came to life. I was looking at this whole entire sheet here, thinking about how I could use all of these different pieces as a whole focal point. So originally I had planned on doing a very large album where I would have different pieces underneath all of these, but I scrapped that idea and I've gone with just this top portion here. Originally I had thought of putting this on the spine. That would be a very chunky spine, and making this the cover, and I think that would have been cute. But then I was deciding and thinking, maybe I want to keep it like this, but I don't want this to just be the cover. So eventually what I've decided was I'll be cutting this here, so this orange border here will be included in the cover, but I'm going to be cutting this down the center here, or not the center, but down this line. So this is going to be one piece and this is going to be one piece, and it's going to be almost like a gatefold. So this cover will come under here a little bit more, and I'll be putting more than likely this piece here on the end of it so that it goes under, so I have a magnetized closure to keep those two together. This is going to become the right hand closure over here, so the album is going to be completely boxed in. But what I'm going to do with this album, I like to do something different in all of my albums. When this side opens, I'm going to have this as the cover, but then I'm going to have waterfall pages so that my 4 pages are different sizes. So whenever this piece opens, you'll see all those pages there, and they'll just be a stagger, like a stair step in size. And then on this side, I may actually add some pages to the right hand flap or the right hand spine piece as well, but they wouldn't be very thick. I haven't decided on that yet, so I will wait until I have these pieces decorated, and then I'll decide on doing this. So that's the general concept and how I start to design my album. At this point, I have not planned any pages, and I don't typically plan any pages in advance. I start with getting a general idea, and then I'm going to build the cover, and then I'm going to start building my pages, and I'll start going from there. Sometimes I'll look at different pieces, and then sometimes I'll just design whatever I like. Haven't decided what I'm going to do here, so I'm going to start today with my cover, and we're going to build the actual album cover. We might decorate the outside of the album cover just because I already have an idea about what I want to do, and there will be no harm in already decorating the outside of the cover. So if you are going to be joining the tutorial as I go along, please have some patience. I will try to get this done as quickly as I possibly can. But if you are waiting, then you'll be able to do all the videos at one time. In the description box below, I will link all of the supplies that you will need to join in the tutorial so that you can gather all those supplies. And throughout these videos, if I add anything in, I will also mention that in the video, but then the supply list will update for each of the tutorials. So if you are following along as we go, I will mention it. But if you're waiting until everything is done, then I'll probably have notes eventually in the description boxes so that everything is updated. So I hope you will have fun with this album with me and join me in the tutorial. In starting with my cover, I've got one piece at a time I'm going to be going through. I will give you the measurements for the chipboard and the cardstock as we go, just to make it a little bit easier. Now I know it's very hard to see this black cardstock on my black Graphic 45 matte. I don't tend to use a lot of black cardstock just because it's hard to see on camera and whenever you film it for tutorials, but because the color of the album, I'm going to be using black. So hopefully we'll be able to get through this without too much difficulty. My cardstock is cut to 8.5 by 8.5. My chipboard is cut to 8 inches by 7.5. Now what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to take my chipboard and line up the right hand side with the edge of the cardstock. That way I now have a 1/2 inch around these 3 sides. You can draw a line, measure up a 1/2 inch and draw a line if you want it to be exact. I am not going to, just because it doesn't really matter. If it is exact or not, you're not going to see this. So I'm going to take my adhesive here and apply it to the entire back side of this piece and adhere it down to that right side like I showed, with that 1/2 inch edge on the other 3 sides. If you are new and have never followed one of my tutorials before, you may need to pause the video at times to be able to complete this step and then resume the video. I do not usually show things like gluing unless I am mentioning something as I'm going, because I don't feel like that's very interesting and it just makes the video a lot longer and it takes longer for it to upload for me. So I try to cut out parts that I don't feel like are very helpful for you to see or are not very interesting. Once I have my piece on, I am going to take my scissors. Now I do have these acrylic spacers here. I sell these on my website. They come in a couple different colors. I have an 1/8 inch and a 1/4 inch. I'm going to be using my 1/8 inch spacer. I'll be using these later whenever I go to place my pieces together. But you can also use your spacers like this if you want to make sure that your edges are exactly 1/8 inch. So you can place these up against the corner and draw those lines and then just trim on the line, because we need that paper to extend past that corner a little bit so that whenever we go to wrap this, we have enough paper. I'm going to flip over on the other side, and I'm going to use my bone folder and run this right along this edge here and on this edge here and this edge here. So now I've got this nice crisp edge up against all three of those edges. This will make your album look really neat once you have it done. I'm going to start with the one end, moving it up and over and burnishing it the rest of the way. And then I'm going to add my adhesive to my 1/2 inch flap, and then I'm going to fold this flap over to start wrapping these edges. Now, if you are using double-sided tape, if that's what you prefer, just make sure that you have enough on here that this will stick. So you want this to be all the way down, if you use double-sided tape, all the way down that piece. Once I have my paper down, I'm going to take my bone folder and tuck that extra paper around that corner so that it wraps it. And then I'm going to fold up on those sides and use my bone folder across the top. And then I'm going to adhere both of these pieces down. Once those pieces are down, you should have these nice clean corners. And this is what your piece will look like on this side. This edge is not covered yet, and that is perfectly fine. So we're going to set this piece aside for now. And we're going to bring in another piece of cardstock. This one is cut to 10 3/4 by 8 1/2. And the chipboard is 10 3/4 by 7 1/2. Now I'm going to be adhering this down to the center of my piece so that I have a 1/2 inch on top and bottom. Once I have my piece on, I'm going to take it to the back side and use my bone folder just to crease this paper. And I'm going to do it on both sides. And then flipping onto the inside, bringing this up and over. And then I'm going to adhere both of these pieces down to my chipboard. So here is this piece covered. Both ends are still open, but the edges for the top and bottom are covered. We're going to take our next piece. Our cardstock measures 4 1/4 by 8 1/2, and then our chipboard piece measures 3 3/4 by 7 1/2. Now on this piece, we're going to place this up against the left edge. So we're going to have a 1/2 inch on top and bottom and along the right-hand side. Once I have my chipboard on my cardstock, I'm going to take my little spacer again and mark my corners. Going to trim that excess paper. And then I'm going to turn this over to the opposite side and use my bone folder to crease that paper down all 3 of those edges. Now I'm going to flip over to the opposite side and use my bone folder here to crease that paper up and over. And then I'm going to apply my adhesive to my smaller tabs first to adhere those down. Then I will use my bone folder to press these corners in. Once I have these pieces on, just tuck this around. Do the same with this one. And then I will finish up with the third edge, wrapping that final side. Now I have my piece here that has 3 sides wrapped. The 4th side is not. I'm going to set this aside. And I've got 2 pieces now. So these pieces measure 4 inches by 8.5 inches. And then I've got a piece of chipboard that measures 2 3/8 by 7.5 and a 2.5 by 7.5. These are an 1/8 inch difference because this left-hand spine is going to be an 1/8 inch smaller than this side. What that does is it makes this side stick up a little further, because when this piece attaches to it, it's going to be sitting on top of the cover. We need to have enough room underneath here for that other cover to sit and to be able to put a magnet. So that's why there's an 1/8 of an inch difference. So it lifts it up a little bit and gives us that space we need so that it's not sticking up in the air like this. So we're going to take these pieces one at a time, and I'm actually going to use my ruler for this part. Coming down here, I am going to use my centering ruler. And this is the 2 3/8 inch piece. So I'm going to do this one. I'm just going to mark it at 1 1/4 from center on both of them and place it in the center of there. And same thing up here. Marking at 1 1/4 and 1 1/4. Now what I'm going to do is adhere this here in that center so that I have a 1/2 inch on top and bottom, and there's going to be about 3/4 of an inch on each side. Now I am just eyeing this, trying to get it to be pretty even with a 1/2 inch on top and bottom, but you could measure and draw a line if you want it to be exact. Not a big deal if it's not exact. I'm going to just burnish this down, and I'm going to set this one aside, and I'm going to do the same thing on the second one, marking again at 1 1/4 from center. If you don't have a centering ruler, or if you're new to making mini albums, centering ruler can be very helpful, so I would recommend that you get one. Now I'm going to take my second spine piece and I'm going to adhere it right into the center of that second piece. Now I'm going to switch these out, taking my first one that I've had stuck down for just a little bit longer. What I'm going to do with this one, I'm going to flip over to the back side, and I am going to use my bone folder on the short edges only. Then I'm going to fold up and over. And now on this one, I am going to fold and hold this in the center. Then I'm going to take my bone folder and press this paper down like this. So I'm creating these little tabs on each side. Same thing on this side, starting in the center, holding it down so that the cardstock doesn't shift, because I need this to actually go slightly down at an angle. So what you'll see when you do yours, this is very slightly angled down. And now I'm going to adhere both of these pieces down. So I'm going to put adhesive on this whole 1/2 inch strip piece, not just the part in the center. I want the whole thing to be adhered down. So I'll just repeat what I did. Once the adhesive is on there, I'm going to start in the center and then take my bone folder right along those tabs. And then the same thing on the second side, making sure I add my adhesive, start in the center to adhere this down to the chipboard, hold it in place, and then burnish those wings down. Once I have that, I'm going to flip to the back side, use my bone folder here along both of these long edges to crease that paper. And now I have my piece like this. I'm going to leave it alone. I'm not folding these up and over. This is the piece that we need. I'm going to repeat that same process on my second spine exactly. Now that all of my pieces are wrapped, I have my 8 by 7.5 inch first piece that I wrapped. I have my 2 3/8 by 7.5 inch piece that has my 2 wings on it, and I'm going to start here. Now what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to use my spacer. If you don't have a spacer, you need to leave about 1/8 of an inch gap, or if your chipboard here is thicker or thinner, you need to leave 2 times the thickness of your chipboard. So my chipboard is 1/16 of an inch, so 2 of them makes it 1/8 of an inch, which is why I have the 1/8 inch spacer. I'm going to set my 1/8 inch spacer here, and this is going to be adhered right down here, leaving that space between those so that whenever this cover comes up, it has enough room to sit right inside of there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually take my piece and apply my adhesive here. If you have that spacer, you can also draw a line down it so you know where to place your adhesive if you're afraid of putting adhesive under your spacer. So I've got my adhesive here. I'm going to set my spacer down. If you do not have a spacer and you are doing this, you've drawn a line down this, you can also put your roller down here at the bottom to make sure that your pieces are lined up straight, and just place the edges together. But this spacer makes it much easier. I'm going to make sure that the unfinished or unwrapped edge is up against my spacer. I'm going to press this all together, remove my spacer, and then burnish this down. Flipping over on the back side, I'm going to burnish this down from the back side just to make sure that that wing or tab is adhered down really well. So now I have my front cover and my left hand spine. I'm going to take my back cover, that's the 10 3/4 inch piece, and I'm going to repeat that process. So I'm going to now put my spacer on this right hand side, and I'm going to apply my adhesive. So if you don't have your spacer, you need to measure so that you know where to place your pieces, and then apply your adhesive along that tab, making sure that you've got plenty of adhesive here because you don't want this to be pulling up later, but you don't want too much adhesive where it's oozing out and warping either. I'm going to set my spacer down in here, and then I'm going to take my piece. Both of these edges are unfinished, so it doesn't matter which way it goes. And I'm going to set this piece down in here, remove my spacer, and then press this down, being very careful that I don't shift and move this. So if you feel like it shifts at all, you can always stick that spacer back in there, making sure that you have that perfect 1/8 inch gap. Now I'm going to flip over to the back side and burnish down from the back. Now I have the back cover in. I'm going to bring in my second spine piece. That's the 2.5 inch piece. I'm going to repeat that same process. So I'm going to take my 1/8 inch spacer, or measure that 1/8 inch so that I know where to place my adhesive. I'm going to apply my adhesive all the way down the left side of my tab. Set my spacer down in here. And then I'm going to bring this cover in, and set it right up against that spacer. Pull that spacer out and burnish this down. We're going to burnish from that back side just to make sure this is nice and adhered. And then we have the one final piece. So we're going to take our 3 3/4 inch piece and add it here. And this is the part that is going to be the closure on top of the cover. It's going to be magnetized. So I've got my adhesive on. I'm gonna put my spacer in here. And then the side with the unfinished edge, I'm going to lay down in here and then burnish this down. I'm going to flip the whole cover over and burnish from this side. So now we have our finished cover, and I'm going to let this dry for just a minute, and then we'll come in and add some additional pieces on our spines. To cover my 2 spine pieces, I've cut 2 pieces of cardstock. They both are 3.5 by 7.5. Now you want to sit these on here before you put them on. They're going to be the same exact size as your cover, so we're not cutting them smaller. A lot of times I'll cut my pieces 1/8 of an inch smaller when these are wrapped because you don't need to worry about it, but since these are not fully wrapped, they have to be the same size. So when you sit this on here, if for some reason yours is sticking out further, if it's just a little bit larger, you need to trim this a little bit until it is the same exact size. So I'm going to size up both of these to make sure that they both are good. And it looks like both of my pieces, when I have them on here straight, look okay. So what I'm going to do is take my piece, I'm going to apply adhesive to the entire back side, and I'm going to set this right down here in the center. So I've got a little bit extending onto each of my other pieces. It's going to cover these pieces here, the gaps, and then it's going to cover my entire spine section. Once I have my adhesive on the entire back side of my spine, I'm just lining this up so that I know where that center is. And now I'm going to make sure that these edges are lined up. And then I'm going to take my bone folder and burnish this down, being very careful that the piece doesn't shift. I'm just going to adhere everything down. And then I'm going to use my bone folder in this crease to get that paper to go down in that crease, and I'm just going to carefully lift up on the edge. So now I have that piece, the paper in that piece. I'll repeat that on the second little space, making sure that the paper is in there, but we need to make sure that this doesn't lift up. I will usually do this when the paper is dry, but I want to try it and see if it actually tucks in there any better, but it looks like it's not going to work as well, which is why I do this dry typically. So if you have not done that yet, I would recommend waiting. I'm going to add this down to get this to adhere down, and then I'm going to leave that for a minute and I'll come back to that one. I'm going to do the same thing on this side over here by adding my adhesive and applying this right over the center. Now I'm going to leave this side to dry. This side should hopefully be dry now, so I can take my bone folder into there. I do see that it's gapping here still from where I pulled up on that. So this is how I'm going to fix it. Going to take my little hook, put some adhesive on it, and apply it here. If you have a glue bottle that's got a really thin tip on it, you can just put it in there and put some glue on it. But I found this tends to work for me when I need to add some additional glue. Okay, so now this should be good. And then we've got that nice gap in here. I am going to wait a little bit longer to let this side dry before I start to crease in here, because I don't want to repeat what happened on the opposite side. Once your adhesive is dry, you can go ahead and just take your bone folder in that crease, very carefully bend that cover up. Same thing with the second side, using your bone folder in that crease to crease that paper. Be careful here that you don't push too hard and tear a hole in it. I did that in one of my albums before and it wasn't fun. So now we have that one. And then over here, I'm just going to redo the one that I had a lot of problems with. And now we have this. So now the album will come together. Remember, this is not going to overlap a lot just because of the way the cover is designed. There's just that small overlap in that paper right in here. Now the last thing I'm going to do for my cover build is apply my magnet so that I can have my magnets hold my cover together. Remember, I had my piece, I've cut it apart so that I can use it. I'm not putting it together yet, I'm just using it for reference. This is going to be here, this piece is going to be here. That way, whenever this is over it, that piece that was on here is going to be a continuous pattern. But this is where my magnets are going to be. So I need to put this so that it's in the center of this piece. So one thing that you can do, you can set this on here. I'll give you a measurement in just a minute, but if you're ever doing this on your own, you can just put your piece here, mark where it needs to be, and your magnet needs to be about 1/2 inch from that edge. The magnets that I'm going to be using are actually a little bit smaller, but thicker than I normally use. So this is the typical magnet that I use. It's very thin, and you'll see this one is much smaller, but it's actually a little bit thicker. And I like to use these magnets on my covers because I feel like they hold really well. So I have 2 sets of magnets here that I'm going to use. And I'm going to be placing them here in the center. To place your magnets, you can use double-sided tape like I am. You can use glue if you prefer. If you're using the basic gray magnets, they already come with adhesive on them, so you just peel them off. So really, it's up to you how you decide to put your magnets on. Do you want to make sure that it is about 1/2 inch? That one's a little bit off. But you want this to be about 1/2 inch when you put your pieces down. So I'm going to set this one right here, and this one I'm going to put just at the edge to see if it's, there we go. So the center of the magnet, about 1/2 inch from the edge. I'm going to take a second magnet and apply another piece of my adhesive right on top. And then I'm going to peel that backing off and leave the adhesive just on the magnet. Now, normally, whenever I do a cover like this, it comes all the way over so I know where to stop my cover. But I have to eye this one and make sure that I have it straight and make sure that this is not too far over. So I'm going to try to make sure that this one is straight here. And then this one is also at a 90-degree angle. And press these down to place these magnets. And now I'm going to add another piece of my double-sided tape over top of these magnets just to make sure that they stay in place while I'm working. And that they catch like that. So now, there we go. So we have our cover. Hopefully you can see that it is straight. This is bunching up. Okay, just the way it looks when it's sitting. So I don't want it to be actually leaning like this, but whenever it's down, it's actually flat. I thought it was going to be up in the air like this, but it's not. And you can flex your cover a little bit to make sure that it is straight up in the air this way, that it's at those 90-degree angles, just like that. And now we have our cover is ready to go. The only thing that we don't have in there is the hinge, and then I'm going to come back later and actually add those hinges. So this is all for the first part of the tutorial. I hope you are as excited as I am to see what this album is going to look like as we go. If you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment below, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial.